As we do every week, we check in with KTBB owner, general manager Paul Gleiser, and you tell me, what's on your mind, sir?
Good morning, Garth. We are sponsored by KE Cellars, Tyler's Old World Style Boutique Winery in the French Quarter on South Broadway across from the mall. A moment, please, to offer a bit from the You Tell Me Texas User's Manual. We've made it as easy as we can for you to share these posts with your social network via email, Facebook, and Twitter. If you hear something you like or something that makes your blood boil, either way, please share it with your friends and colleagues. And speaking of sharing, what we most want you to share is your own voice. This is a conversation, not a lecture. Your comments are the most appreciated part of your participation in You Tell Me. It's going to be one of those days, folks. I'm just warning you. Just go to youtellmetexas.com, see what's on my mind, and then tell us what's on yours. That's why we call this feature You Tell Me. In his first State of the Union message in January 1964, barely a month after taking over from the unexpired term of President Kennedy, Lyndon Johnson launched what he called the War on Poverty. In his speech, he called for, and I quote, an unconditional war on poverty in America, and pledging not to rest until the war is won. The legislation that resulted 8 months later, known as the Economic Opportunity Act of 1964, either created or vastly expanded such government programs as Head Start, Volunteers in Service to America, otherwise known as VISTA, Medicare, Medicaid, and aid to families with dependent children, what we now call welfare. At the time of LBJ's proposal of the war on poverty, the poverty rate stood at approximately 20%. Today, using census data from 2008, the rate stands at approximately 13.2%. Hooray, I hear you shouting. That's a 34% decrease. It looks like the war on poverty worked. Well, I'm not so sure. How can you separate the facts that the war on poverty programs that were authorized in 1964, it started coming online in 1965, are entirely coincidental to one of the greatest sustained economic expansions in history? How much of the decline in poverty is attributable to America's rise and success? And how many in an economy that was producing vast amounts of wealth would have found a way out of the ghetto and gone on to lead productive, prosperous lives, even if there had never been a war on poverty? Further, and this is a key point, as opposed to those that succeeded either with or without help from the war on poverty, how many have been made irretrievably dependent on government handouts in order to survive? How many otherwise able men and women are now permanently enslaved by dependency on an alphabet soup of government programs and agencies? For how many has the animal spirit and survival instinct been subsumed by well-meaning but soul-destroying handouts from the government? At the time that the war on poverty was launched, the U.S. economy was producing so much in goods and services that an arrogant belief in the power to completely wipe out poverty, however misguided and unlikely, could actually be held. The economy was so successful that it afforded such liberal conceits. In 1964, all but the abjectly poor were producing more in economic output than they were consuming. Today, such is no longer the case. For all intents and purposes, the United States is insolvent, unable to meet even its own basic operating expenses without borrowing money from often hostile foreign powers. America today is not creating sufficient wealth to support the idea that every high school kid is entitled to a college education. We're not producing enough wealth to support the idea that every adult is entitled to an easy path to home ownership and that everyone should be able to get whatever they want from their doctor with little to no out-of-pocket expense. But expectations of all three have become deeply entrenched, thanks in no small part to the conceits first evidenced by the war on poverty. We have become convinced that we can live on wealth without the bother and sacrifice of actually producing wealth. Anyone who so chooses can live for a time as if he or she is wealthy. But for how long? Time is the critical variable, and time is not on America's side. Until we are again a nation of producers of wealth as opposed to consumers of wealth, a terrible day of reckoning will come ever closer until finally it's too late. That's my word. What's yours? Go to youtellmetexas.com and you tell me. If there is anyone who is a tough wine critic, it's my wife. She puts on no airs at all. She either likes the wine and says so, or she hates the wine and really says so. Thus my trepidation in pouring for her a glass of KE Cellars' recently released White Zinfandel. Now this is a wine variety my wife likes, but from Tyler, well, only a taste would tell, and so it did. She loves it. She dispatched me to fetch her more. She likes White Zens, and this particular blush-colored wine strikes a very neat balance between enjoyable fruitiness on the one hand and drinkability by red wine enthusiasts such as me on the other. If you like blush wines and wines with some of the fruitiness of the grape still in evidence, the K.E. Cellars new White Zinfandel is for you, but don't take my word. Visit K.E. Cellars today after work and ask to taste it. That's because K.E. Cellars is a working winery with a tasting room. Try any wine before you buy it. You cannot make a mistake. K.E. Cellars, Tyler's Old World Style Boutique Winery in the French Quarter on South Broadway across from the mall, and online at KECellars.com.